So once again, give you a very warm welcome to our seminar this afternoon. I'm delighted to say that we're joined by three excellent speakers across the three different ARC regions. One from ARC East England, one from Northwest Coast, and the other one from Southwest Peninsula. What we'll have this afternoon is that we'll have three speakers, and they will have 10 minutes each. And then we'll have after each presentation, we'll have about a 5-minute Q&A session. So please do use the Q&A box, which is in the Zoom, just below your Zoom toolbar, and put in your questions, and I can see them, and I can present those questions to the speaker. Just very quickly, in this year's National ARC Seminar Series, we'll be exploring the healing power of creative arts. And we will be hearing from our researchers on creative arts for dementia care. So these three talks will be around the impact of music therapy, singing and dancing intervention for people with dementia, and using creative arts to involve people with dementia in research. So my name is Steve Lim, and I am an academic geriatrician based at Southampton Hospital, and I'm with the ARC Wessex, and I lead the aging and dementia theme. Just a little bit about the NIHR ARC. This is a network of 15 NIHR applied research collaborations across the country funded by NIHR. And we are a research service close to the beating heart of health and social care. And a lot of the work that we do is about supporting applied health and care research across the country. Towards the end, we will put up a QR code or a link so that you can follow us on our various platforms, on X, on Blue Sky, and etc. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker for this afternoon. His name is Dr. Ming-Hung Su. So Dr. Su is a senior research fellow at Anglia Ruskin University's Cambridge Institute for Music Therapy Research. And since 2008, Ming has developed a music therapy service in care homes, winning the Langbuisson Excellence in Dementia Care Award. He's also the CI for the Melodic Project, which is funded by ARC East of England, which is a new music therapy intervention protocol and guide for NHS Dementia Awards, which is co-designed with the stakeholders and experts by experience. So over to you, Dr. Su.
Thank you, Stephen. I'll share my screen. Okay, great. Thank you. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to speak about music therapy in dementia care. So today I would just like to focus on the Melodic study, which was funded by the NIHR Research for Patient Benefit program and supported by the ARC East of England. And the aim of the study is stated in the title. So this is the research team, including 3 music therapists, 1 clinical psychologist, 1 old age psychiatrist, and 1 public member who brings his lived experience of NHS mental health dementia wards as a family carer. So NHS mental health dementia wards admit patients who are most unwell, often under the Mental Health Act. And most patients experience extreme distress, which can result in physical assaults on ward staff every other day. And we know medications can have concomitant adverse effects, including increased risk of mortality. And we know currently that non-drug interventions are not widely implemented or researched on these wards. So we thought music therapy could be part of the potential one day, could be part of the solution one day. And the members of the research team conducted a retrospective observational study involving 2 wards, and found that on the days where music therapy was delivered in person, there were fewer reported incidents of disruptive and aggressive behavior. However, a national survey found that there were only 15 NHS wards having access to music therapy. So this is why, Sorry, I've been coughing, so excuse me. So this is why we decided to pursue this, to co-design a new music therapy approach, and hopefully we will be able to standardize it and implement it across different NHS wards. So we used the co-design approach. We set up a co-design group which consisted of various professionals such as nurse, ward manager, occupational therapists, music therapists, and trainee psychiatrists. And so as you can see, the co-design group work equally alongside our research team throughout these different very important key stages of our project. And to be able to create the treatment manual, melodic treatment manual, we conducted 3 studies for a series of studies. The first one is a systematic review. So that will help us understand what psychosocial interventions have been implemented and researched on these wards. And we found that the major barriers to implementing these interventions include staff turnover, the lack of time, and understanding of the intervention. So it is so important to have a trained interventionist who can implement the interventions or support staff in using interventions or in implementing the interventions. We also wanted to come up with a theory to help us understand what mechanisms are needed for music therapy to work to generate the change or sustain the change needed. And so what we have found is that if music therapists on these wards only focus on delivering music therapy sessions, while they may be beneficial, but they might not be enough to generate the change and sustain the change needed. So it's so important that the music therapist demonstration and communication with the staff should enable staff and families to use personalized music in everyday care. And it's very important for the music therapist to assess the needs and feed these identified unmet needs into their demonstration and communication. We also conducted focus groups and interviews with staff, families, and patients, and we found that their experiences in managing distress very difficult, and a lot of detective work is needed to understand a person's behaviors and to identify possible root causes of distress, and also identify the strategies needed to manage in everyday life. But music is already widely used on these wards. However, it's not used strategically to respond to or prevent distress, especially in difficult care situations. So the 3 studies, the findings from the 3 studies then informed our co-design process. So last year we delivered a co-design workshop day, and on the day we discussed the findings with the co-design group and incorporated their experiences and views. So eventually we could identify the key components of the intervention, but also decide on the content and style of the treatment manual. So as you can see now, these are different versions of the treatment manual targeting different staff groups. But most importantly, we identify the 4 key components. The first one is a music therapist embedded in the ward team 15 hours per week. And during these 15 hours, the music therapist would deliver one-to-one and group therapy sessions. They will also create an individual musical care plan for each patient based on the patient's personal history and preferences, and based on the music therapist's knowledge of the patient through their interactions during therapy sessions, because the music therapist would use music, verbal and other sensory cues with the patient to see how they respond to these. And so the fourth element is for the music therapists to feed back to the staff and families on these wards and to be able to help them embed music and in these difficult care situations. And on the right, you can see this is the musical care plan. This is one page because staff don't have time. Anyone who picks up this one-page care plan would be able to learn what music, what songs can be useful, especially in difficult situations. And hopefully, this is the way to help staff utilize music to respond kind of in the right place at the right time. And just to quickly share some results of our pilots. So we conducted 2 pilots sequentially. After each pilot, we used the findings to refine our theory and the treatment manual. And so now we have the 3rd version of the melodic treatment manual. And this is showing the graph here, you can see the time spent, the music therapy spent on different activities while they were on these wards. And you can see one-to-one sessions took out a lot of time, but we were pleased to see that staff communication was also quite a prominent kind of feature. And we used outcome measures to measure the possible changes to help us understand whether there's any potential impact of melodic. So we use MPI, which is the neuropsychiatric inventory, to assess patients' symptom severity and staff perceived disruptiveness to their work routine caused by their time rebudgeting to manage the symptoms. So it's good to see that there's a decrease in these symptoms and disruptiveness, these kind of areas, although they are not statistically significant, but they are traveling in the right direction. And it's also traveling in the right direction for quality of life, as we can see an increase. But CMAI, which is the Cohen-Mansfield Agitation Inventory, it showed an increase and the larger upper bound of the confidence intervals, such as most patient agitation increased over the 4-week period. And we know the CMAI, the SPARC measure, measures the frequency of different or specific agitated behaviors. So it might suggest that these behaviors will continue to appear or even increase, the frequency might increase, but it doesn't mean that staff are not becoming more confident in managing these different behaviors. Especially you can see the MPI staff perceived disruptiveness decreased over time. So yeah, so I think that's probably everything I would like to say today. So thank you, a huge thank you to our research partners and all the participants, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. Now we've got a few questions for you. The first one is from Liv. It says, very interesting how the online music therapy cohort had more days with incidents on the wards. Do you know why that might be?
So can you say that again?
Yeah.
There were more incidents. Yeah.
Yeah. So those who received the online music therapy cohort had more days with incidents on the wards. And do you know why that might be?
Oh, there were, sorry, it should be reduced incidents.
Okay. Right.
While, music therapy was delivered in person on the wards. Yeah.
Okay. And there are quite a few who say that they would like to see your musical care plan. Is this something that you could share? Is it online or available on a website or something like that?
Yes, I think it is available on the website, through our ARU website, but also I think on the ARC website, East of England, I think that can be accessed as well. Yeah.
Brilliant. Perhaps we could share it in the chat, and then we can send it out to the Q&A section so that people can access your musical care plan. That sounds really interesting. Thank you. In terms of your co-designing, who did you involve in the co-designing process?
So the co-design process, we set up this co-design group. Like I said, we included various professionals. All these people have lived experience as staff and families on the ward. but yeah, so throughout they were kind of like really important to feedback to every stage of the research. But at the same time, we also contacted several PPIE groups, and one is run by Dementia UK, and there's one set up by our institute here at ARU. So, and other groups, we brought our kind of findings to these groups to be able to refine our theories and also the treatment manual. So that's what we have done throughout the co-design process.
And here, there's one question from an attendee. In your study, did your participants only receive music therapy when they were in distress, or is this a fixed time that they get the music therapy?
So yeah, so it's quite flexible. We identified the participants who would beneficial from would benefit from one-to-one or group therapy sessions, but on the days whether they would take up the offer, we don't know. So we record how many sessions they have attended, but also, you know, if they certain participant who need one-to-one session, they could also take part too. So yeah, so it's kind of quite flexible.
Flexible, yeah. And sometimes that you kind of have to be, as well as in the care of people living with dementia, flexibility is quite an important thing.
Yeah.
And Charlotte asks, can you describe what the music therapy entails? So is this about playing recorded music, or is this live music being played? Do they sing, or what was done exactly?
So that's a very good question. So in the kind of traditional music therapy session, the music therapist will interact with a patient through music playing, singing. Music playing that means there can be a selection of instruments, percussive instruments, or different tuned instruments, so that patients can play, the music therapist can play, but the music therapist can also use recorded music if needed. And so it's very interactive, but it also involves talking. So talking is important, and the music therapist will use nonverbal expressions like bodily and facial expressions to interact with the patient. But one thing I have to say, that is just the session. But for a music therapist, role to function, it's not just purely about the sessions. The music therapist will need to look at all different factors, and these factors can be the confounding factors that can prevent us from maximizing the effects of music. So thinking about lifestyle, different, you know, maybe pain it needs managing, and, you know, different things to look into.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ming. Right, so it's my pleasure now to invite our next speaker, Dr. Megan Polden. Dr. Polden is a postdoctoral research fellow from the NIHR ARC Northwest Coast, and she is a member of the Dementia Aging and Research Forum, and also an important figure in the Northwest Coast Living Lab in Aging and Dementia, which aims to bring researchers in social care organizations in aging dementia to develop research opportunities. So over to you, Dr. Polden.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen 1 second. Perfect. So thank you so much for having me today. So today I'm going to talk about Music Makes Us programme, which has been delivered by the Brain Charity, who are based in the northwest of England. And I'm going to talk about the impact of singing and dancing interventions for people living with dementia. So music interventions for people living with dementia, as I'm sure we all know on this call, dementia affects the brain, leading to deterioration of cognitive functioning, but it also includes a lot of behavioural and psychological changes as well. And there are often limited benefits of pharmacological interventions, particularly for behavioural symptoms of dementia, and often as well they come alongside a vast number of side effects and also increased risk of mortality as well. So any interventions that could be used to kind of reduce the use of these pharmacological interventions, behavioural symptoms dementia, could be very, very beneficial. So music and singing interventions offer a non-pharmacological intervention, which is shown to have positive impacts on people living with dementia and also their carers as well, and their family, friends and relatives. So singing interventions for people who are living with dementia can help to improve cognition and memory performance, can help to regulate emotions and mood, and can help to relieve stress and promote relaxation and also reduce levels of agitation. So why is it that singing might have some of these effects for people living with dementia, but also other people with different neurological conditions? So singing has been linked to improved memory and cognition, and this is because it can stimulate pathways in the brain that are linked to that are not utilized in just plain speech. Singing also combines language, music, and instinctive behavior to enhance neurological stimulation. Singing also, when done in a group, involves listening to yourself, but also others, and contributing to the development of auditory processing skills. And singing is also associated with the release of endorphins, which are hormones that can contribute to feelings of happiness and pleasure. And it can also be used as a tool to foster social connection and bonding, particularly when done in groups. So in terms of incorporation of dance elements, so when people receive a diagnosis of dementia, often they experience they might experience some deconditioning, and their physical health may decrease, and their physical mobility might start to be reduced, and they might start to be less physically active, and they might start to have more difficulties with their balance and mobility in general. So being able to incorporate some dance and physical activity elements into pharmacological interventions, into non-pharmacological interventions, can create multi-domain interventions by including the kind of cognitive benefits that you might experience from having singing involved in a non-pharmacological intervention session, as well as some of the physical benefits that you might get from incorporating some dance movements, and whether these be standing dance movements or chair-based dance movements based on people's capabilities. So combining these two just kind of leads to those additional physical health benefits. So by combining neurological, physical, and psychological, and also social benefits obtained from both singing and dancing interventions, it can highlight the need for increased access and availability of music interventions for people with dementia. So it really highlights how being able to just do one type of intervention can really have kind of a large breadth of different benefits for people living with dementia. So I now want to talk about the Music Makes Us service, and this is run by the Brain Charity, who we've had the pleasure of working with on this project. So the Brain Charity is based in the northwest of England, and they aim to help and support people with different neurological conditions, including dementia. So they developed a few years back now a Music Makes Us service, and this included a Music Makes Us sing intervention and also a Music Makes Us dance intervention. So these are free-based interventions for people living with dementia and their carers, and they've been delivered in care home settings and also daycare settings as well. So these singing sessions focus on speech and language, and the dance sessions have been developed with physiotherapists to focus on kind of more physical movements, but both sessions will include some dance elements and some singing elements as well, but the focus of the two is slightly more shifted towards one more focused towards dance and one more focused towards singing. And they are offered in blocks of 12 sessions, and they are offered weekly and across different care homes and day centres across the northwest. So just a bit more detail about the workshops. So the dance and physiotherapy workshops were aimed and designed to help people maintain balance and flexibility, minimise the risk of trips and falls in the future, and maintain independence. And the salt and singing workshops were focused on exercises which would aim to improve swallowing difficulties, strengthen mouth muscles, and help breathing problems. So in terms of our research, we wanted to kind of do some work to examine the impact of the Music Makes Us service. So a lot of previous research has been based in care homes rather than community settings. So this gave us quite an opportunity, as they run a lot of sessions in day centres as well, to kind of have a look at that element of it. A lot of previous research has also only focused on the musical intervention itself and how the effects it has on cognitions, and not really looked at the wider social aspects of the sessions and the impact that has on people as well. And a wider part of our research was really to have a look at a focus on accessibility and sustainability of different interventions as well. So I'm not able to talk about the results from that today, but that is another kind of key part of our research, is really looking at the impact of these sessions, but also looking at how we can make them as accessible as possible and reduce barriers for people being able to access these interventions and making them sustainable. So in terms of the methods, we used a pre-post study design, which was utilised to compare outcome measures before and after the 12-week intervention. So we've got some preliminary results I'm going to share with you from 36 people living with dementia, and there's just some demographic information there from the participants. So 72% of participants were female, and all participants were from a white British ethnic background. So in terms of our outcome measure, we use mixed methods analysis to look at the impact and also accessibility. So we looked at a range of different quantitative methods, and this was looking at social isolation, loneliness, depressive symptoms, neuropsychiatric inventory as well, for symptoms such as agitation, quality of life, and we also looked at feelings of carer burden. And then we included a physical frailty phenotype as well, which looks at kind of more physical aspects. It includes things like grip strength and walking speed, and whether they've experienced weight loss and things like that. And for our qualitative methods, we used a series of semi-structured interviews, which were conducted with people living with dementia, unpaid carers, service providers, and also local facilitators. So this was people working in the care home. And the interviews focus on acceptability, accessibility, and adaptability of the intervention. So just to quickly go over some of our preliminary results. So some of our results found a significant change pre and post intervention. So we found an improvement in performance scores on the ACE-3. So this is an improvement in their cognition. We also found an increase in feelings of social support and a reduction in feelings of social isolation. And this was for the singing sessions. And we found a decrease in feelings of loneliness and a reduction in depressive symptoms. So for the singing sessions, we didn't find that there was any significant changes in quality of life scores. So we had this for a self-report measure and also a proxy measure. So we didn't see any changes for that. And we didn't see any changes for MPI score. So this is kind of feelings of agitation and neuropsychological symptoms. And then for the music makes us dance sessions, we again found improvement on scores on the ACE, so improvement in cognition. We found an increase in feelings of social support and a reduction of social isolation. We again found a reduction in depressive symptoms, and we found an improvement in self-rated quality of life scores. So we saw an improvement for the self-rated ones for people living with dementia, but not for the proxy measures for their carers. And then we found no significant changes in loneliness scores, and didn't find any changes in physical frailty scores as well. So we think for this, potentially some of the measures we use might not have been sensitive enough to kind of pick up some of the physical improvements that people spoke about and reported in the qualitative interviews that we had. So it's something we'd like to explore further with future research to really look at whether there are more objective ways and different ways that we can kind of measure this. So just very quickly before I wrap up, so preliminary findings highlight the positive impact of the Music Makes Us intervention for people living with dementia in both community and care home settings. And the positive results from this study indicate that services could be scaled up and applied to other regions and settings to improve access to beneficial support services for people living with dementia. So thank you so much for having me and letting me share some of my research with you today.
Thank you very much, Megan. Fantastic work. It's really interesting to see your findings. There are a couple of questions. One anonymous attendee says, will these sessions be delivered in the community at all for people who are not in a care home setting or attend day centres?
Yes, so this is something that we are looking into doing and working with the charity at the minute to try and make possible. So the charity had a limited pot of funding to be able to deliver the interventions. So we're in the process now of trying to work with them to get some more funding and use the research to hopefully support then being able to get more funding to be able to deliver them in community settings. I think that's such an important aspect as well, to have, so that people have access to these beneficial services and enabling them to kind of live well at home for as long as possible.
Brilliant. Another attendee says, a very nice study. Did you assess singing together with breathing and voice projection outcomes? Did you consider creating music and words with groups and performing to the public, as in a Turtle Song program we ran in Northeast and South Shields?
Yes, so we didn't do any physical assessments on their breathing capabilities. I think that's definitely something we'd want to look at in the future, and kind of especially as well with the dance interventions as well, and incorporate more tech to be able to measure improvements in balance and gait and breathing and things like that as well. So it's definitely something we want to explore. Sorry, what was the second part of the question again, was it?
Did you consider creating music and words with groups and performing to the public?
Yeah, so this was not something we did for this particular project. We really wanted to focus the intervention settings on it being something that people could just do for fun, and it being a fun activity that they could do. I think it's definitely something we would explore going further. But I think we really wanted it to be, we didn't want it to have that thing where, I think sometimes when you say to people, oh, would you like to come join a singing or dancing session, people say, oh, I can't sing, I can't dance. And we really wanted it to be something where it was like anyone can get involved with, anyone can enjoy it. And I think sometimes the performance can maybe make that a little bit more difficult.
Brilliant. We've got lots more questions, but perhaps we can take some of them towards the end of the session if we have more time. But thank you very much, Dr. Polden.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Without further ado, last but not least, it's my privilege to introduce to you Professor Linda Clare. So Linda Clare is a professor of clinical psychology of aging and dementia at the University of Exeter Medical School, and she's also the director of the NIHR Policy Research Unit in Dementia and Neurodegeneration, or the DENPRU, Exeter, and she's the dementia theme lead for ARC, Southwest Peninsula. So over to you, Professor Clare.
Thank you very much. So my presentation is a little different to the previous ones. I'm not talking about an intervention. I'm going to be talking about involving people with dementia and carers in translating research findings through creative arts approaches. I'm going to do this in relation to the IDEAL study. IDEAL stands for Improving the Experience of Dementia and Enhancing Active Life. It was an 11-year research programme with people with mild to moderate dementia living in the community and their unpaid carers. And in that, as part of that programme, in various ways, artists, researchers, people with dementia and carers engaged in creative activities together to co-produce outputs that either give a public voice to people living with dementia and their families, or provide a stimulus and a space for constructive public discussion and debate about dementia, or inspire hope among people living with dementia or caring for someone with dementia. And towards the end of the programme, people with dementia, carers and researchers reflected together on what we had learned from IDEAL and drew this learning together in a call to action, which is now published in a book. I'm going to show you examples from each of those three themes, and then I'll come to the call to action at the end. So first of all, then, giving a public voice to people with dementia and carers. And I'm going to illustrate this with our first arts-based project, evolved into what became known as the Unfurlings, where artists Ian Beasley, Ian Macmillan and the late Tony Husband worked with groups of people with dementia to see what issues they wanted to voice. And many of these themes, of course, related very much to our findings about the experience of living with dementia or caring for someone with dementia. So I'll give a few examples. Firstly, this group of people with dementia in Yorkshire wanted to focus on the difficulties they were having getting out and about. And they, first of all, made a booklet together. And then they came up with the idea of a banner, rather like a trade union banner or a campaign banner. And the banner had two sides. On the, let's say, the dark side, it showed all the challenges they were facing in getting out and about. And on the other side, the benefits and the joys of having what they called a grand day out. And they went to the seaside, as you can see. And they decided to go public. They had a public unfurling of their banner on York Railway Station with a brass band in attendance and local media. Other groups were enthused by this idea and took up the idea of making banners as well. This group in Exeter, the Budding Friends, focused on, they were an allotment gardening group, and they focused on the issues of loneliness and social isolation, which were very prominent in our findings, and the importance and the value of friendship and social connection. And they showed on their banner how that had been achieved through their particular group. And then other groups did similar things, and here I've related the banners to Alzheimer's Society reports where our findings were used and cited. So here Kirklees Deep wanted to emphasise the difficulty of navigating the maze to get to the services and support you need, and that was mirrored in Alzheimer's Society's Left to Cope Alone. And Oldham Dementia Carers, they focused on the importance of peer support and the absolute need for good support for unpaid carers, and that was mirrored in Alzheimer's Society's report, The Fog of Support. Let me move on here. So the banners were exhibited together, all of them, in an exhibition called The Unfurlings at the People's History Museum in Manchester in December 2019, and then went on tour, a little hampered by the COVID pandemic. They went on tour around the country, and they were also brought together in a book called The Unfurlings. So moving on to the second theme, providing a stimulus and a space for public discussion and debate. Here I'm going to illustrate this with two theatre-based projects. The first one, The World Turned Upside Down, our involvement group, the Always group, who were crucial to co-creating all of these resources through the IDEAL programme, worked with theatre director Paul Jepson and 3 talented actors. And theatre is a great vehicle for exploring communication, and that's what we wanted to look at here. We created a live performance that was performed 3 times, and it consisted of a series of scenarios showing key points in the experience of dementia, from noticing difficulties to going to the memory clinic to telling family, etc. And the scenarios were played, and after each one, the audience is then invited to suggest changes in communication that might lead to perhaps a more positive outcome. And this was very helpful in thinking about ways which communication can help rather than hinder. And around this, we made a documentary film that shows the process of developing the piece as well as the scenarios themselves. That's had nearly 10,000 views on YouTube. And some of the individual scenarios are being used in CPD training, especially, as you might imagine, the doctor's appointment. And I just want to mention the artwork, very striking artwork that was done by Willie Gilder, who is living with dementia. And the second project, just as theatre is a great medium for exploring communication, we thought that opera is a fantastic medium for exploring and sharing intense emotions. And we worked with director Marion Brivdier and composer Ed Wright to develop a 1-act opera. And again, our Always involvement group were crucial in advising them and the singers. This opera, The Bridge, explored the emotional journey of developing dementia, receiving a diagnosis, confronting the prospect of living with the condition and finding a way ahead for the future. Again, it prompted, we had a lot of activities around this pre-performance workshops and post-performance debates, and those were very, very moving. And then my third theme was inspiring hope for living with the condition. And here I want to focus mainly on our Living with Dementia toolkit that was co-created for people living with dementia and 4 carers from the Always involvement group, met with 2 research team members fortnightly for 7 months to create this online toolkit, and then they continued to develop it thereafter. It started life as an idea for a resource to support people during the COVID pandemic, but it became much more than that. And the sections reflect the themes in our IDEAL findings translated into everyday language, and each one and when you go into it, contains numerous resources and examples and ideas to inspire. And a lot of them relate to creativity and creative arts. For example, here, let's just give one example. Irene Donaldson reads her poem, which is about using voice-operated technology. So the poem's called Alexa, describes her perspective on that. And the toolkit's been accessed by over 23,000 users in 130 countries. It's included in the World Health Organization Global Dementia Observatory Knowledge Exchange Forum. Here in the UK, we know the materials are being used by individuals, services, clinics, mental health teams, community and third sector groups, and there's a wealth of information in there. And then just also to mention, as we heard about singing, we commissioned 2 musicians living with dementia, Paul and Tommy, to write a song based on the ideal findings. And Brave New World became the official song of the Alzheimer's Disease International Conference in London in 2022, and it's been played nearly 3,000 times on YouTube. Finally, I just want to come to the call to action. So we had the opportunity to write a book about the ideal findings, and we wanted to co-create this with our involvement group. And so for each of the chapters, which took a theme in the findings, the group read the chapter, wrote a reflection on it, and came up with a manifesto point, a statement about what they'd like to see changed or improved. And those statements were drawn together in a chapter at the end of the book. The book was published in May this year. If you want to buy it, we can provide a discount code that gives you 20% off. We hope that these 10 statements will reflect things that we can continue to work on in the future to improve the experience of living with dementia and make use of these findings from the programme. So that's everything I have to say. I'd just like to thank everyone who contributed to the programme and the initiatives I've described, especially the Always Group, and obviously to our funders. And I'd like to just mention my 2 colleagues, Dr. Catherine Charlwood and Rachel Litherland, who were key players in these arts-based approaches. So I'll stop sharing now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Clare. It's a huge amount of work that has been done over a couple of years, but it's really impactful, which is really exciting. I think there's a comment that says the banners are beautiful. Heather Millard says we were lucky enough to host an exhibition of them, perhaps in Bradford. Is that right? We had them in Bradford, and they were incredibly moving. I'm really interested about the using opera to tell the the storytelling of the journey of someone with the diagnosis of dementia. Can you tell us a little bit more about it and what it actually entails?
Yeah, so in fact, our director, Marion Brivdy, who's a colleague at the time, or previous colleague from, now retired from Bangor University, who taught music, was an opera singer herself, was interested. She had been doing music groups with people in the community and had involved people with dementia and carers and got interested in this. So we had a lot of discussion about that experience and all of the shared understandings of what it might mean. And the opera was based around a character who was an artist, who began to experience difficulties, and the process that he and his wife went through to try to come to terms with that, and their interactions, not necessarily very positive, with various services and people who came to offer often good-natured support, but not really understanding the need very well. And I think, we've heard that earlier, haven't we, about the importance of personalised approaches, especially around things like music and so forth. And that was something that very much came across in our piece as well.
Brilliant. Chris asked, how can we get the book, please?
Oh, that's a good question. I might have to come back to you on that. If you wouldn't mind, if you could drop me an email, I will make sure I find out the best way to do it.
Okay.
And I think my email was on the last slide, but I can pop it again in the chat if I can retrieve the chat.
If you pop your email in the chat as we go along.
I might have trouble retrieving with mine.
Linda's got a question. How much of this wonderful breadth of activity was pre-planned versus serendipitous?
Which activity, sorry?
All the work that you've done, are they all planned, or were they just opportunities that came along that you seized them? Or
yeah, I mean, it was fortuitous opportunities, really. I mean, we'd always thought that it would be. We'd thought when we started the program, we didn't have any arts-based involvement. We kind of worked with our Always group to think about how we could make the most of the findings, and then it was very fortuitous. I mean, the first one was I happened to hear, I knew of Ian Beasley, and I happened to hear him give a talk, so I was able to chat to him. He'd been doing a lot of work in health, and we got talking, and that was how we got that one started. And then it evolved. I mean, the banners weren't there at all in the plan to start with. They kind of emerged from the process, which was wonderful to see. And the theatre one as well, I mean, why that emerged as well, because there was play performed in Exeter, and I was asked to be on a post-show discussion panel with Paul Jepson, the director of the theatre at that time, and that again it led us to think and talk, and so we then worked from there. And the same with the opera, really. So it was a lot of fortuitous. I guess it was just the programme making us think about these things and then taking opportunities that came along. It wasn't anything we'd really planned at the start.
So there's a follow-up question then. So this 11-year program looks amazingly helpful. What happens after this? You know, what is the sort of follow-up plan following this?
Yeah, well, we already had a follow-up, and originally it was a 5-year program, and we had the second phase, which has allowed us to do an awful lot more with the findings. We had a big cohort study of over 1,500 people with dementia and 1,300 carers. And so if you look at the website, there's over 80 scientific papers. But we also produced resources. We produced resources for, or co-produced, I should say, resources for example, for ICBs and practitioners. And as you've seen, also for people with dementia and carers. And so probably our next step is to try and get those fully taken up as much as we can. And then, yeah, and then there's probably, I think for me then, probably my next thing, as you may know, I also have an interest in rehabilitation, and I think combining what we know from IDEAL with that kind of rehabilitative approach is the way I'd probably like to go. To look at, you know, enabling people to have as much autonomy and choice and independence as they can do, and to be able to access a lot of the resources that are out there around the country, not necessarily the same everywhere, but to think about, you know, the potential for those and what could be helpful in not necessarily solving all of the problems, but to at least make living with dementia a bit more of a better experience for people.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite now the other two speakers to join to unmute yourself or at least share your video again so that we can perhaps open up the floor for more questions to all three speakers. I've got a question. Perhaps Dr. Sue might be best to answer this one. It says, can music therapy also be used as prevention rather than just treatment? And what are the efforts being made in the UK to integrate it in care homes, into care homes?
Prevention refers to preventing symptoms or
I suspect it's preventative in terms of symptoms of dementia.
I'm not too sure, because based on the evidence we have, including the latest Cochrane review of music-based therapeutic interventions, they don't seem to highlight anything to do with prevention at all. So it's kind of like a responding to symptoms. Yeah. So something to explore, and hopefully through our melodic study, we're looking at how we can identify strategies to prevent certain patterns of, occurrences of symptoms. But that's something for later on in the future to highlight. Yeah.
And also perhaps as a single intervention, it will be difficult to show that it can prevent symptoms because also, with symptoms or even progression of dementia, this is all multifactorial. You've got mental causes, you've got all sorts of reasons in it. So one aspect of care is unlikely to impact greatly. Dr. Polden, how much of your work, I know pretty much for most of your participants it was white British, in terms of inclusivity and accessibility of your intervention, was there more work or could more work be done in terms of trying to engage with people from other ethnic minority backgrounds?
Yeah, this is something that we definitely want to explore going further. So currently for the study that for the findings that I presented today, the sessions were already pre-planned by the charity which delivers them, and the care homes and the day centres in which they were delivered were already pre-planned. So we were kind of restricted, unfortunately, to a predominantly white British participant sample. But I think being able to expand the sessions to community-based settings would be able to provide more diversity in the sample, and as we know, a lot of people from kind of different ethnic backgrounds maybe are less representative in care homes and day centres and things like that as well. So I think expanding the study to community-based settings might help address that. But I also think it's really important to look at specifically co-designing music and dancing interventions that are culturally specific. And I think that's a really, really important area of research that needs to be developed further. I think sometimes it's really important to have an intervention that is appropriate and co-designed and culturally relevant to people.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. One of the things about personalized care is we know that there's no one size fit all, isn't it? Which means that actually people, time, and money is important. In any of your studies, and this is open to all three members of the panel, did you have any sort of indication of what the cost might be, or in terms of delivering the service that you're testing out? Perhaps we can start with Megan.
Yeah, so the cost, I can't think of the exact numbers off the top of my head, but I know that the charity received a small funding grant to deliver these intervention services, and they managed to span that over the course of 5 years. So they were very cost effective in the interventions that they were delivering to people. So yeah, so it is something that we want to examine in terms of the cost per session, and kind of look at the social return on investment for that. It's part of our wider work that we wanted to do, and really look at kind of the cost benefit analysis in terms of social return for that.
Brilliant. What about Dr. Sue?
So for the melodic study, the intervention, we only kind of documented how much it will cost to employ a music therapist and the equipment, musical instruments needed. I can't remember the exact number, but we haven't got to the stage to look at cost effectiveness, because that's probably for later on when we conduct a definitive trial. So.
Okay. Professor Clare, perhaps a bit more difficult because yours is quite varied, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's not a service as such. I mean, these were different things. But what I can say is, and I mentioned rehabilitation, and so we know that that can actually is quite modest cost. If you think about maybe 6 sessions from an occupational therapist, might be about £350 per person. This compared to the cost of some more expensive treatments that may not have that much effect is really very little, very modest, and yet we don't seem to invest much in that area. So I think all of these things, occupational therapists, physios, speech and language therapists, music therapists, is such an important investment that we often don't sufficiently allow for. And for example, in that rehabilitation, there is evidence it can delay admission to a care home by 6 months. So this could be a huge benefit for people and carers as well. So I think there's a strong case for investing more in these psychosocial approaches.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think what it really does show, all these three talks to us is that these are added tools in our non-pharmacological armory to improve the quality of life of people living with dementia, isn't it? It's not just turning to the sedatives and the drugs, but actually there are so many other aspects of their care that we can actually improve to make sure that they have a better quality of life. Well, thank you very much for our 3 speakers. It's been a fantastic session. I think we're just about to finish our seminar. We've got 2 minutes left, so perhaps just to tie up some loose ends. It's been a real delight and joy to have you join us this afternoon, and we once again thank the 3 speakers for all their hard work and for taking time out to present. And for those of you who've joined us this afternoon, once again, thank you for your participation and your interaction and your excellent questions. This is a QR code that was talking about, the Linktree QR code, and it just signposts you to all the different ways in which you can find out more about NIHR ARC. And if you would like to be involved, and as I said, there are 15 ARCs across the national, across the nation, and you can go to your region and look for your ARC and see the fantastic work that they're doing. So with that, I will bid you farewell and have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day. Bye, everyone.